All right, everybody, let's turn to Matthew chapter 24 and continue. We're in the earliest verses, the first two verses, and then verse 3 is a different paragraph, but in the first two verses it begins, Jesus went out and departed from the temple. That this is a continuation of where he just was in the place of the temple where he sparred verbally with the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the scribes, and the chief priests, and pronounced those 9 woes upon them, showed his tender side when he lamented, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them that are sent unto thee, and how he would have, as a mother chicken would gather her hens together, but the people refused to do that. And that's really what the judgment is all about, that it's because they refused Jesus, and that's why they're called by Moses a perverse generation. Jesus called them a faithless generation, a wicked generation. Paul called them a crooked and a perverse generation. Peter called them an untoward generation. But all of them have ominous overtones, don't they? That's why the judgment was going to come down upon these people. And as we pointed out, going back to verse 35, the constant repetition of the word you. And Jesus is addressing this to a particular audience, and he called them you, that these things are going to come upon you. These things shall come upon this generation in verse 36. And so Jesus now, after having the parting words that this house is left unto you desolate. We're talking about the temple, your house, not God's house. It's no longer, in God's mind, it's no longer sin. People have so adulterated and prostituted Judaism that now God has removed his name from it. It's no longer God's house. And so he moves away from that temple. And the disciples, it says, come to him to show him the buildings of the temple. When it says that they come to him, we learn from another verse down, but also from the Mark and Luke account, that Jesus has gone across the Kidron Valley and then up to the Mount of Olives. And the Mount of Olives is east of Jerusalem, and they can look down and see the shining buildings, the gold sparkling temple, and the granite buildings of the temple complex, and they remark about that, and they're enamored by that because, again, as we made mention this morning, Jerusalem, the temple grounds, that's the center of their world, their life. That was everything that is Jewish is incorporated in the city and the temple. And so Jesus said in verse 2, see ye not all of these things? Verily and of course, see ye not all these things is talking about the fact that they had pointed out the buildings. And so Jesus said, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as we made mention this morning, that's a historical prophecy, and we know by extra biblical accounts. I mean, we can take the biblical account, which we absolutely trust, but we can go to Josephus, Herodotus, Tacitus. We can go to secular writers who attest to this fact. Plus, I mean, you know, it's a monumental event in world history, and so it's recorded in the literate world. So nobody can dispute that. And I think most people religiously understand that Matthew chapter 24 is talking about the destruction of the temple. The sad thing about it is that they also want to believe that there's future representation of Jesus' words when he's constantly talking about and pointing things out to you, which we'll see as we continue on. If anybody has anything to add or observation, please comment as we go. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us. You, Jesus, tell us. Does that help us with context? Sure it does. Which shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? Now, the most obvious thing is the end of the world there, because people who are not understanding how Bible language is used, they're taking and they're applying the literal application to the word world, because the cosmos, I think Daniel brought this out the other day, the cosmos, the word by which we get the word cosmos in Greek would definitely refer to the earth or the planet. But we understand how world is also used in a societal sense, right? John said in 1 John, I think it's in chapter 1, verse 15, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. He's not talking about the planet. He's talking about the world in a societal sense, isn't he? And so to be able to appreciate the fact that this word world in the Greek is the word aeon. Daniel brought that out the other day in places where he was speaking. It's the same thing that we had in Matthew chapter 13 in the parable of the tares, that the burning of the tares was the end of the world. And again, the end of the societal world of the Jews. Yes, sir.
My translation says the end of the age.
Yeah, right. I think your more recent translations are taking it in that, using it in the figurative sense and using it the word age.
I got King James, and it also has a center reference saying that it uses as age too.
Yeah. Well, that's what the word aeon is. It means the age, but it's the translators that use the word world, which is not wrong, as long as they were using it in that societal sense, right? I had made a couple notes of references. Let's look at. There's the question that's posed in the Matthew account. Let's look at the question in the Mark and Luke account, if you don't mind. Mark 13. Verse 1, and as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples said unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. In the Matthew account, it says the disciples asked him. So would it be a contradiction to say that one of the disciples asked? No, because you can have a group and still what? One speaks. Within the apostle band, who's the one that most typically speaks? Peter, right? So we would understand that. And Jesus answered and said to them, Seest thou these buildings? I had inserted the word all. Great buildings, there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, over against means opposite of the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately. So we get the disciples, then we get one of them, and now we have these that are named. Tell us, when shall be these things? When shall these things be? And what shall be the sign when all of these things shall be fulfilled? All right, now let's look at the Luke 21 account. We're getting basically the same thing, but it's unfortunate that people want to warp these expressions and want to come up with a justification for breaking Matthew chapter 24 into the destruction of Jerusalem and then to a future event that's not even happened yet. Verse 5, yes, thank you, Ashley. And that, I got too many marks in my Bible. Verse 5 of Luke 21, and as some spake of the temple, that's because he's in the disciple band, right? How it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts, he said, As for these things which you behold, the days will come, in the which there shall not be one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And they asked him, saying, Master, but when shall these things be, and what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? So it's obvious, here the context is these disciples asking Jesus when it's going to be that they are going to do what? See these things. Why? Because Jesus has already told this generation when he was speaking in Matthew chapter 23 to the religious leaders. If you'll look at Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 1, it's a little more commentary. I should have inserted this when we were looking at the word world, but I want to note something here. Chapter 1 and verse 1, very familiar passage. God, who at sundry times, that means different times and in divers manners, different times, different manners, spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the what? He made the worlds. So now what I want you to do is turn over to Zechariah chapter 14, verse 8. The universe, really? Zechariah 14 and verse 8. Here you get, this is what the Hebrew writer, in my mind, this is what the Hebrew writer is referring to. Zechariah speaking prophetically, in case you've not studied them together, but Zechariah chapter 14 can really parallel Matthew 24. It's amazing the parallel that is there. I alluded to this one this morning in our, but it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord. That's the same as Matthew 24:36. Zechariah 14. Did I say 8? I apologize. I think I said verse 8, but I want to get more verse. 14, yes, sir. I'm going to go up one verse, verse 7. And what he's talking, the it there, the antecedent of it is, behold the day of the Lord in verse 1. Okay, the subject is the same. The day. What is the day of the Lord? And we understand the day of the Lord not to be a calendar day, but to be what? Yeah, right. It's an indistinct time period, a time period when something is God's justice is going to be exacted. The day of the Lord. And goes verse 7, but the day of the Lord shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord, not day nor night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light, and it shall be in that day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem. Living waters, that would be the gospel, right? Half of them towards the former sea, and half of them towards the hinder sea, and summer and in winter. All right, so if we're talking poetically, metaphorically, the former sea would be the first covenant Mosaical age, and the half of them to the hinder sea would be for the Christian age, the second covenant, the church. Okay? And it says there in verse 9, the Lord shall be king over all the earth, and that day there shall be one Lord, and his name one. I think that comports with 1 Corinthians 15, verse 28. All things be God's all over again, like it was in the Garden of Eden. If I don't make us clear, anybody just don't hesitate to say them. Tell us, disciples going to Matthew 24, asking Jesus to tell us when these things shall be. I think it's ignorant to say that disciples don't associate the things that Jesus has been talking to them as things that would include all of the warnings and the ominous overtones here of God's judgment coming, and that they're wanting to know that all these pronouncements that he has made on the religious leaders. Jesus said in verse 36, verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. That would be what Daniel taught us relative to the vindication of the saints, the reward to the righteous, and the punishment to those that are wicked. This is, again, if we look at Matthew chapter 23 and say, what is the major theme of Matthew chapter 23? It has to be God's judgment, God's justice in terms of reward for the righteous and punishment for those that are wicked. And when he's saying here, he's saying that upon you religious leaders, may come all of the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. So it's only natural that after Jesus has now, in the fact that they had the expressions that they had made that showed that they were enamored with all these beautiful buildings, and Jesus says not one stone is going to be left standing on another, it's only natural that they should ask what? When's this going to happen? And what's going to be the sign of thy coming? When they say the sign of thy coming and the end of the world, I don't see, you'd really have to twist and warp the scripture to make it sound like the disciples don't know anything, as some people like to put it, that they're definitely responding to the things that Jesus has said. In Matthew chapter 16, I will build my church. In Matthew 16, verse 28, just go back a few chapters, and this has not been long hence since Jesus said these things. Matthew 28, the confession of Peter, and I will build my church, and that I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. Verse 27, for the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall what? Reward every man according to his works. Verily I say unto you, who's he talking to? Still talking to his disciples. There be some standing here which shall not what? Taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. That's why I was trying to establish a dateline with you this morning to be able to understand the reference to this generation. And we looked at those passages that we can find, that we can define a biblical generation to be approximately 40 years, and that Jesus has been preaching 3 years, or now at the cross, and so we're roughly 37 years away from the year 70 when we know that all of these things took place. And so I think, we would be showing our own ignorance to think that the disciples don't know anything. Yes, ma'am. Right.
What has been your experience? How do people explain that? Because it's like it's right there.
They don't explain it. They only justify it because they have an agenda. They have a preconceived presuppositions on the end of the world, the blowing up of the planet, the coming of every eye shall see, meaning not the Jews in that particular generation, but every eye shall. We heard it right here. Well, I've got 2 eyes, and it says every eye shall see, and I've not seen him coming, so Jesus hasn't come. And that's the way I think the ignorant world, the ignorant religious world. When I say ignorant, I don't mean stupid. I mean not knowing. I mean unstudied. Okay, people unstudied, because the religious world is looking for what? A literal resurrection of the physical body, Jesus coming in his physical form, and Jesus coming to the earth to reestablish what? The temple in Jerusalem, and to reign from Jerusalem. That we call it millennialism. That the majority of the religious world is looking for that. So it's only natural then that when I talked about a while ago, you have to twist these scriptures to come up with some concoction to make it. Well, here it's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, but here in these verses he's talking about when he comes again. Not understanding that the destruction of Jerusalem is one of the signs of thy coming. It's a spiritual coming. He's not coming in physical form. He's coming spiritually. Well, when things have been spoken of that are physical, and there's a spiritual representation to those things, Jesus has predicted the destruction of the Jerusalem, and that is what? God's judgment on old covenant Israel. First covenant Israel. That's why for us to be appreciative of what the enormity is of the loss of the city, the loss of the temple, the loss of the priesthood, the loss of the sacrificial system, the loss of all the court records, the end of the law. It's a monumental shift, and it has affected the entire world. It's not just an interesting note in history.
Did you say one time it was roughly 1 million people that died?
Yeah, 1,000,001. It's right here in Josephus. 1,000,001 either slaughtered or died by famine, and the scenes that he depicts